A year of extreme weather events and an energy crisis kick-started by the aftermath of COVID and the war in Ukraine has made it clear that the planet needs an accelerated route to net zero emissions by 2050.
It is a reality that is increasingly here.
To reach our net zero targets, we need to be saving 10 to 15 gigatons of CO2 by 2030. That's 3 to 5 times more than the current global commitments. The good news is that we already have the technology we need to get us back on track. In this series of a Greenprint for a sustainable future, we will explore how existing technologies can speed up the transition while delivering access to clean and affordable energy for all.
Think about the climate crisis, it's predominantly an energy crisis. That means we really have to rethink where we source our energy from, and as importantly, how we use it.
At the end of the day, we will win only if we have an energy that is more distributed, that is more digitalized, that is affordable, all at the same time. And why so much emphasis on energy? 80% of the emissions are coming from energy.
Energy supplies are under pressure, yet 60% of energy is lost or wasted, making energy efficiency an important part of the clean energy transition.
The best way to manage energy efficiency is first to implement digital solutions, making sure that you are able to control your energy and making sure it regulates the level of energy everywhere is very important.
Since the United Nations Climate Change Conference in 2021, governments and businesses have been increasing their commitments to net zero carbon emissions.
It was very much the COP of collaboration, with significant efforts from the private sector to put commitments on the table, from the finance community committing over $130 trillion in capital into climate change.
The good news is you have 3,600 companies in the world who have committed to become net zero, compared to 200 in 2018. It's a huge acceleration.
It's fantastic we've now got over 90% of global GDP covered by a net zero target. What's really important now is that those targets are turned into action. Governments and business need to look at what are their priorities between now and 2030 to really begin to move towards that goal.
If we don't, global temperatures could rise above 1.5 degrees, a catastrophe for the planet.
We know we are not on the trajectory of 1.5, and I think all of us already today we realize that there are a lot of strange things happening everywhere in the world, a lot of natural disaster. But the good news at the end, you have an acceleration, and we know that the technology are available to put the planet back on track to 1.5. So now the question is, are we willing to do it?
Despite strong commitments in the last 12 months, a global energy crisis has raised natural gas prices and threatened to derail net zero targets.
The topic of energy crisis is very important because it's an opportunity and a threat. It's a threat because people are anxious, for instance, in Europe, not to have access to energy during the winter.
There's a sort of short-term and maybe a medium and long-term impact of this crisis. So there's an immediate response crisis mode, which risks in certain contexts kind of putting us a little bit off track in terms of climate. So for example, reverting back to things like power plants, because they're available, they're a solution in the near term.
The best way, to mitigate gas is to switch faster to electricity. And we see a very large number of countries everywhere in the world who have made that decision. Faster we are less dependent on gas and we go towards electricity, the better it is.
Switching to electricity using renewable energy sources is not only good for the environment, but also for energy autonomy, protecting your businesses and infrastructure from future energy or climate change shocks. One way for businesses to ensure a reliable and clean source of energy is to install a microgrid.
A microgrid is a set of energy production on-site, solar rooftop. It can be wind, it can be geothermal. This is combined with a battery and with the software. You see a demand of microgrid increasing because of unreliability and making sure that this will reinforce energy security. At the end of the day, it's also an enabler to reduce the CO2 emissions.
The combination of worsening extreme weather events and the global energy crisis shows that although stronger commitments are good, we need to go faster to be on target. Thankfully, there is a solution. We must focus our efforts on the convergence of electricity and digitization. Electricity 4.0.
It's about making energy more electric, more digital, and the combination of two is what makes it possible to be back to 1.5.
Our vision is that the world will be more electrified and more digitalized. And therefore, we see more electrification, more distributed renewable, more clean energy, and at the same time, digitalization being operated and being deployed as an enabler for electrification. Digital is especially important in reaching net zero because it is a way to address energy efficiency and to optimize energy production, understanding where you consume the energy and how to reduce the energy that you consume.
So these types of tools that can be in the hands of consumers that give them the information that they need to then take the actions that help address climate change are incredible.
Data-driven solutions that enable more electrification are key to paving the way towards a smarter, greener future.
The only way to get to this 1.5 degree trajectory is to be more electric and more digital. Now you are entering in a new era where you need more energy, but you need more decarbonized energy at the same time. And that's what Electricity 4.0 brings to the table.
Electrification is vital to the clean energy transition. However, existing grid infrastructure needs to be considered as we create more energy demand.
Our society is becoming a digital society. Everything is becoming connected. So let's just think for a second about the implications of that. That is obviously causing a significant amount of energy consumption. So
if you capture the three areas, like decarbonization of the energy production, plus working on the demand side through energy efficiency, and have digital deploy across generation and demand, we could reduce the emissions by 10 gigaton a year. It's absolutely huge.
To put that in perspective, in 2021, the world produced 36 gigatons of energy-related CO2, meaning that digital efficiency solutions could help to save 25% of these emissions. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to decarbonization, but Electricity 4.0, with its smart use of technology that is scalable and available today, could be the way we can accelerate our net zero goals. However, not every continent or nation is able to approach decarbonization the same way. There are a number of challenges, from geography to economic development, that need to be considered.
For the emerging economy, it's a different story because it's on one side how you support the growth of your economy. So you need to provide energy to those countries which are growing, which are creating cities, which are creating infrastructure. But also at the same time, it's about helping the 2 billion people who don't have a proper access to energy today.
Africa's pathway to net zero needs to be informed by the fact that only 4% of global emissions come from the African continent. And while it plays a very small role in causing climate change, it's highly exposed to the impacts that climate change will bring about in the years ahead.
Asia is another continent that is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, but unlike Africa, it needs to drastically cut back on carbon emissions.
5 out of 10 of the largest emitters around the world are in Asia, and they make up over 45% of global emissions. A number of these countries have set mid-term net zero carbon neutral targets. But what really needs to happen now is that those mid-term targets need to be turned into short-term policy actions.
It's important to also recognize that this is a region that includes some of the most vulnerable populations in terms of the ability to adapt and prepare for the impacts of climate change today. At the same time, it's also an incredible source of things like renewable energy.
The world has a window and the technology to achieve its decarbonization goals, but does it have the collective willpower to follow through on its net zero commitments?
At the end of the day, this is beneficial for the world economy to address this climate change crisis even faster. And that's why, yes, we have to go for it, not in 2050, but right now.
We've done amazing things to transform our society. We can do this. It's not a question of can we, it's just a question of really putting all of our efforts into this transformation.
You know, I'm a very optimistic person, so I believe it's still possible to get back to net zero. I see a huge acceleration in the past 3 years, which give me a lot more confidence in our collectivity to make it happen. But now it's not anymore about speech, it's about action, and it's about strategizing, digitizing, and decarbonizing.
More than 90% of energy-related emissions comes from just 3 sectors: buildings, industry, and transportation. In the next 3 episodes, we will explore why electrification and digitization is vital for their decarbonization, helping us pave the way to achieve net zero emissions by 2050.